You know that feeling we're all searching for? That job that just clicks, where it feels like your personality, what you need, what you're good at, it all just lines up perfectly with your work. It's kind of the holy grail of having a career, right? But what if that simple gut feeling is actually way more complicated than we think? Today, we're going to dig into the real science of job fit and find out what actually makes us happy at work. So let's start with that big question. What does a perfect fit at work really mean? I mean, we all have an idea in our heads. A job that matches you, plain and simple. But as we're about to see, the science behind that feeling shows that what we think is a perfect fit, well, it might not be what makes us truly successful or satisfied in the long run. For a long, long time, researchers have been trying to pin this feeling down with a framework they call person-environment fit theory. You can think of it as the original common sense theory for why some jobs feel amazing and others just feel completely wrong. At its heart, the idea is really simple. It's just about how well you and your job vibe together. It's like a puzzle. You, with your personality, your skills, your values, you're one piece. And the job, with its demands, its culture, the perks it offers, that's the other piece. When they snap together perfectly, that's what they call fit. And this whole theory is built on three basic ideas that seem like total common sense. First, the theory says that the fit itself is the best predictor of success, more than just your personality alone or the job alone. Second, it says a perfect match is always the best case scenario. And third, it assumes that any kind of mismatch, whether you have too much of something or not enough, is equally bad. Makes sense on the surface, right? So, this graph here shows us what that perfect world looks like in the theory. I know it looks a little intense, but think of that colorful surface as a mountain range of job satisfaction. The highest ridge, the peak, runs right along that perfect diagonal line. That's the sweet spot where what you need is exactly what the job gives you. It's a really clean, elegant model. It looks great on paper. But here's the million-dollar question. Does our messy, complicated real world actually follow these nice, neat rules? Well, when researchers actually put this to the test, the answers were pretty surprising. All right, so let's do that. Let's break down those three core rules one by one and see how they actually stack up against the real-world data. And trust me, this is where it starts to get really interesting. So let's start with rule number one, the idea that fit is the ultimate predictor of success. Well, it turns out that's not always true. A lot of the time, just having a great environment is a way stronger predictor of whether you'll be happy. Things like having a supportive boss, or good resources, or just a positive culture. Those things tend to make everyone feel better, regardless of their specific personality. You know, a rising tide lifts all boats. Okay, next up, rule two. The idea that any perfect match is just as good as another. So the theory would say if you want a lot of autonomy and your job gives you that, you'll be just as happy as someone who wants very little structure and gets that. But the data just doesn't back that up. It's almost always better to have a match at a high level, to get a lot of something that you really, really value. And this right here explains exactly why. Researchers call this the difference between a gain and a non-loss. A gain is when you get something positive that you really wanted, like getting a ton of creative freedom because you value it highly. A non-loss is just avoiding something you dislike, like you hate being micromanaged and, hey, you're not being micromanaged. See the difference? Getting what you love just feels fundamentally more rewarding than simply avoiding what you hate. Okay, so this brings us to our final rule, and this is all about misfit. The classic theory says any bad fit is equally bad. So having too much of something you don't want should feel just as bad as not having enough of something you do want. But is that really how it works? This table makes it super clear. There are two very different ways to have a misfit. So look at that top row for high personal need. If you don't get something you need, say you thrive on feedback but your boss never gives you any, that's a deficiency. Now look at the bottom row. If you get too much of something you don't want, like you're an introvert forced into constant team meetings, that's an excess. And here's the big punchline. A deficiency is almost always worse. Not getting enough of what you really need hurts your job satisfaction way more than getting a little too much of something. I mean, think about it. An excess of good things, like too much support from your boss or too many opportunities to learn, that's usually not a problem, right? In fact, it can be great. But a lack of those things, that's almost always a huge problem. So we've kind of poked a bunch of holes in the old school rules of job fit. So what? What are we supposed to do with all this? How should we actually think about finding a job we love? Let's turn all this theory into some real practical advice. This quote from the research we've been looking at just completely flips the script. Optimal fit seldom exists, cannot be realized. Wow. So maybe the goal isn't to find some mythical perfect job that never changes. Maybe the real skill is learning how to manage the imperfect fit that's just a normal part of any career. So here's the new playbook, a much smarter way to think about all this. First, zero in on what's truly important to you, your non-negotiables. That's where fit matters the most. Second, don't sweat an excess of good stuff. Getting more support or autonomy than you thought you needed is almost never a bad thing. Third, and this is so important, don't just be a passive searcher for fit, become an active creator of it. It's a concept called job crafting, where you actively shape your own role. And finally, just remember that you're going to change, and your job is going to change. Being adaptable isn't a weakness. It's your single greatest asset for building a career you love over the long haul. And that leaves us with this final, really powerful thought. The whole conversation can shift from, where can I find the perfect job, to a much more empowering question, how can I create a better fit right where I am? How can I shape and mold and craft this job into something that works better for me? Because it turns out the power to create that fit is probably more in your hands than you ever realized.